What you're about to experience is one man's quest to see beyond the tumultuous period we're in and to envision what lies just beyond our grasp, yet well within our reach. Welcome to Larry Rifkin's America Trends, where the future has arrived, and it's just in time.
Welcome back to another episode of America Trends Podcast.com. John, do you like that when they write it out .com, D-O-T?
I know.
And you're trying to write it.
I see that away.
I know, and you're saying, wait a minute. Oh, that's
I see that on
period.
copy all the time because I guess it's easier if you're in the studio reading it on copy.com, but it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, it really is.
And
when
I've even
you're
seen
transposing
some
it from
websites that do that.
Mm-hmm.
They spell it out .com. I don't know.
I don't
get that either.
But anyway, we are still AmericaTrendsPodcast.com. We've not left the internet. We've not left the planet. Though John and I were thinking of going to outer space. And I know, John, you went to view the stars recently, not in Hollywood, but the real stars.
The real stars.
And I didn't get to go.
Oh, you missed a good one.
I know. How was it?
It was really fun, seeing the stars seeing Saturn, seeing the planets was really amazing from those telescopes. They had these big 18-inch mirror telescopes, and I've never seen Saturn and rings the way I did. I mean, it was really incredible.
And tell us, what does Saturn look like? I think the only planet, if it's still considered a planet, that we consider that we know what it looks like is Uranus. Let's
not go there.
Let's not go there. No, I don't really want to go there.
No, it's not a very hospitable planet.
No, from what I can tell. But what about Saturn?
Saturn, well, I mean, we saw the rings. You could see the rings around Saturn, and you could see it was just incredible seeing it yourself. You forget about, we take the sky for granted, but it's really amazing what you can see out there.
And of course, we've had people on our radio program from a local observatory planetarium, and my goodness, I memean, the new discoveries every day it makes it almost implausible to think we're alone out here.
No, I don't think we're alone. But, whether there's, I honestly don't think we have Martians or flying saucers coming down here either. No. But there's probably other planets with life on. You'd have to think about all the thousands of stars out there and the possible planets that are around those stars. I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, we had Donnie Brasco on recently. I was going to try to get E.T. on. And now you've just blown the whole thing. I mean, you really have.
Well, he phoned home.
Well, it's amazing. We've got this vast universe out there. We've got this beautiful, wondrous world out there with just incredible ways that nature repairs itself and the way that nothing goes to waste, as C.J. May taught us on Talking Trash. And now, of course, why is it? Why, John? Why do we always focus on this one little piece of property when we have this vast universe that we can talk about? And that piece of property is Washington, D.C.
Ah, yes.
I mean, really, is anything?
Talk about vast wasteland.
No, but seriously, we spend so much time worrying about what these folks who are very transient, who come there for 2 years or 4 years, or in certain cases, like the U.S. Senate, they never leave until the gurney comes. I mean, the journey to the gurney in the U.S. Senate. But we had a gentleman on we talked to him, just a bit ago, and we wanted to share him with you. His name is Philip K. Howard, and he has this organization. And John, there are many organizations who are looking to change things in Washington.
Absolutely.
Except they don't want to change them that much because they're feeding off of either the good stuff in Washington or the bad stuff. But they have these names, and his name for his organization, and I do think he's really trying to do good, is called Common Good.
Right, okay.
And what he's trying to warn us is that a lot of what goes on in Washington is on autopilot. And we've given up a lot that we think our elected officials should be in control of and in charge of, and we've given over to faceless, nameless bureaucrats. And he wants to really kind of change that around. And he really wants civil service to work better. He wants all that goes on in Washington to be more effective and controlled by the people of the United States.
Yeah, but how do we get the money out of Washington? That's the problem. These people spend more time, on the phone with trying to get money than they do actually their job.
Well, that's what goes on with a lot of our elected officials. People might be surprised to learn that if you talk to your average congressman, they're spending 50% of their time raising money. Now, they can't do it at their own desk. So there's a place across the street from the Capitol where the Democrats and the Republicans can sit and wrangle people for money. So I think what you're saying is no matter what the intent, nothing is going to change in Washington until the way we fund campaigns ultimately changes.
Absolutely. I think we at least got to start there because, let's face it, money talks. And if you're given big dollars, no matter who you are, you got the ear of the representatives. And that's really part of the problem that's stopping us on health care and everything else.
Well, he is suggesting, and by the way, this is a bipartisan group. So he's got Republicans like Alan Simpson. He's got Democrats like Bill Bradley. And they want to come up with some new approaches so that, in fact, things are allowed to change and evolve, and we're not stuck in gridlock. We haven't given everything over to the bureaucrats, and we're taking control of our government back. People, not rules, make things happen. That's one of the things they say, and that is fundamental, in their view, to how we write laws and regulations. And, I mean, look at any highway project today. It has been slowed down to a point where unless you're getting 1,600 permits in advance, and they're coming from all kinds of agencies, they're overlapping, nothing gets done.
Right, that's a problem, too. I mean, we've over-regulated some of these things to a point where, you're right, nothing gets done. Absolutely.
So this common good, they're advising both federal and state organizations on how to overhaul the government, the regulatory reforms that they think are needed, and eliminating obsolete laws. And I've got to tell you, there was a very liberal congressman in Connecticut years back, Toby Moffett. And I thought he had a really interesting idea. He was one of those guys who came in right after Watergate, that whole class of folks.
I remember that.
Yeah, who were reformers. And he basically said there should be one session of Congress where they don't implement anything new. They just take things, look at them, and really weed the garden and take things off the books.
That would be refreshing.
Yeah.
They did that in the state and in the federal government. That would be a great idea.
But they never do.
And
they just
that
add on. And sometimes they add new laws that conflict with old laws. I mean, it is something of a mess. But he's been writing a lot in the Wall Street Journal. He's got a lot to tell us about this issue of kind of getting government into a better phase. We were talking about the moon and Saturn. We've got to get government into a better phase. So, John, why don't we listen to Philip K. Howard?
Let's do that.
And he's going to share with us.
We need some new ideas.
Absolutely. For the common good, we need some new ideas. Okay, Philip Howard, of course, you have started an organization called Common Good. Explain what you're intending through this organization.
Common good really only has one idea, which is that we need to restore the freedom of humans to take responsibility at every level of society. So teachers have the freedom to maintain order in the classroom, and the president has the freedom to make decisions needed, by the executive, and the environmental official has can take responsibility to decide how much environmental review is needed in a particular case, so that it doesn't take a decade to approve, vital new infrastructure projects.
How do we balance this? In other words, we now are looking at a president who's doing a lot by executive order. And, for example, recently had a bill signing, and the president of Dow Chemical was there, and it would ease some of the regulations and some of the things that they produce. And he said we might as well call this the Dow bill. But we don't want to give people such authority that they begin to work against, perhaps at times, the public good. How do we balance this?
Well, I think that's the most important question. And in fact, most of Trump's executive orders, I think, are just noise. They're sort of ordering agencies to go do things differently, but they don't really have a new idea about how to do things differently. So you're not going to see much change. Well, let's take infrastructure permitting for a second.
Yes.
There's still a law that's really important called the National Environmental Policy Act that says you have to do environmental review. That's important to do. But when the law was passed, they expected that environmental review for a big project might be 100 pages long or 200 pages long, and it might take 6 months, to really study it and focus on the real issues. Well, what's happened today is environmental review can take longer than a decade. It can be literally 10 or 20,000 pages long, so that it's completely incoherent and impenetrable to any real person. Mm-hmm. And the real issues are hidden in lots of minutiae that don't make any difference. So it's like Aristotle said centuries ago, millennia ago. Everything is a balance, and so you want the official to have to comply with the act and do a good faith environmental review, but you also need the official to use his or her judgment to decide what's important. And if an official acts in bad faith and just goes through the motions, then that'll be subject to being overturned by a court because it's been done in bad faith. So ultimately, we have plenty of checks and balances in the system. But what we've done is we've built a system because we're so scared of bad authority, not without reason. We built a system where we can't have good authority. So Washington is basically paralyzed. I mean, nothing's happened in Washington for decades. It's just the entire city is dedicated to the status quo. That's what all those interest groups do. They just keep things the same.
Absolutely. Well, Howard, you have worked closely with leaders of both of the major parties. You wrote the introduction to Vice President Al Gore's Common Sense Government. You've got people like Lawton Chiles and Bill Bradley, and then Republicans like Alan Simpson. So you really are looking at this in a very mainstream way. You wrote the book, The Rule of Nobody. But somebody built these rules, and they have grown over time into this thicket of laws that seem to constrain rather than encourage creativity and common sense. So somebody wrote this stuff. Tell us how we got all this stuff on the books that is now so paralyzing.
Well, we woke up to abuses in the 1960s. We finally woke up to the abuses of racism. We woke up to pollution, lies about the Vietnam War, more. So we decided to change the system to avoid bad authority. And the smart people at the time thought that with new computers and everything, they could actually calibrate laws that tell everybody how to do things correctly. So that regulation would be would be like a software code. All you have to do is go to work and comply with the 4,000 worker safety rules, and the workplace will be safe. Well, it turns out that idea is basically central planning. It doesn't work. Worker safety, for example, it is important to have, not have defective equipment, but what's most important is a culture of safety, training, and an emphasis that safety is important. And if you spend all your time trying to make sure that the paperwork is in order, which the rules require, rather than training people to be safe, you're actually making the workplace less safe. And so that's what I did a report that was cited by Hillary and everyone during the last campaign called 2 years, not 10 years, about infrastructure permitting. And one of our findings in the report was that environmental review, as practiced today, is dramatically harmful to the environment because it prolongs all these polluting bottlenecks. So we have a rickety power grid that wastes, 10% of the electricity. That sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So people have to be able to use their judgment to make things work. Nothing in the history of the world ever got accomplished because somebody mindlessly followed a rule. It just never happened. Whether any of your listeners, whatever good has happened in their lives, it's because somebody made it, somebody decided to make it work. Whether it's the teacher in the classroom or the doctor or the radio interviewer, it doesn't matter. People are thinking for themselves and taking responsibility. That's true in government, too.
When you look at certain things that we've built, and you have written about civil service within the federal government, that was meant to keep some of the politics out so that good people could learn what it was that was necessary to learn in that agency and then perform a public service for the people. Where has that gone wrong? And has this new, for example, VA bill, which allows the commissioner or the head of the Veterans Administration to have a lot more leeway about the penalty for bad behavior, and we've seen a lot of that costing people their health and their lives. Tell us whether that's a key to how we need to look forward in terms of the way we evaluate civil servants.
Sure. So the civil service was put in originally in the Pendleton Act of 1881, and it was designed to create a merit system. Before then, a new person got elected, and they just appointed political hacks to the jobs who had no idea what they were doing. It was a spoil system. It was just terrible. It didn't work at all. So they decided to create a, quote, merit system where people would get their jobs based on their ability through a neutral hiring process. It was actually not tenure. There was no assurance of lifetime employment, but there wasn't a political motive to get rid of people because the politician couldn't hire the new person. It was it was a system of neutral hiring by tests. That was what that was about. And the bottom line, and it sort of got captured by the public employees. And when John F. Kennedy became president, he signed an executive order to reward the support he got from the unions, allowing public employees to collectively bargain against the government.
And FDR thought that was a bad idea.
Yeah, and FDR thought it was a terrible idea, and so what happened, and it's corroded slowly, but basically. Accountability became non-existent. It didn't matter even if you showed up to do your job. And that isn't to say that most people in government don't work hard. They do. There are really, many heroes in government. So anything that works is because somebody in government is making it work. But what happened is it slowly corroded the culture. And because you couldn't hold people accountable, that was like Miracle-Gro to write specific rules telling everybody how to do their jobs. So that was one of the incentives to create these 10,000-page rule books, to tell everybody, because you couldn't hold them accountable if they didn't do a good job, if they were mean-spirited. So now we're at the point, and there have been 2 Volcker Commission reports and others talking about this, where talented young graduates won't even think about going into government because it's such a lousy culture. They're not allowed to take responsibility. They're not allowed to do the public good. They just go in there and they sit there and they read this dense rule book, and whenever something happens, they just say the rule made me do it. I mean, it's just horrible. So what you want to do is restore a sense of pride, and you want to restore the merit system. And what the new VA bill does is it kind of takes the capsized ship and turns it right side up again. It says the manager presumptively is the person supposedly making the decisions about who's doing a good job and who's not, that being the job of a manager. And the employees still have a right to object, but if there's substantial evidence, then the manager, for the manager's decision, then, in other words, if there's a reasonable difference of view, then the manager should win because he's the manager, not the employee. Whereas today, the way it works for all the other civil servants is that the question is this employee so bad that he should lose his job? When the question ought to be, is this employee good enough to keep his job?
Interesting. You have a series of practical fixes for a broken Washington, and Common Good, of course, has put together what you consider to be a pretty clear path forward, bipartisan support for it. And, for example, one of the things you say is that environmental review could be done in a year or two, not a decade. And I recall that we were fixing a highway here in Connecticut, or expanding it, and I think it needed 1,600 permits and took about 7 years to accomplish. And even at the end, they had some problems with it because there was no appropriate oversight. So tell us how we do this. How do we begin to comb through this thicket and make this more reasonable, sensible, more time-focused? How do we know what's good or bad in terms of what should be included?
Yeah, a really good question. So it's actually a lot easier than you might think, because the solution is not to go into the thicket and just edit the thousands of rules. That would take 1,000 lifetimes to do. You could never do it. And that's why ultimately the Reinventing Government initiative didn't succeed, and why Obama was not successful, even though he had this brilliant guy, Cass Sunstein, in charge of regulatory reform, because they wandered into the jungle with pruning shears, hoping to make government work better. But it's still a jungle, and it just keeps growing back, right? So just to give you an example, we have a proposed legislative amendment, including the explanations, the total amendment to streamline infrastructure permitting, that's 3 pages long.
Wow.
And it's 3 pages long because what we do is we simply create clear lines of authority. The chair of the Council of Environmental Quality still has to comply with environmental laws and stuff, but he has the job of deciding issues about the scope and adequacy of environmental review. It takes 3 lines. The head of the Office of Management and Budget, who works at the White House, if there are disagreements among federal agencies about the permitting, has the job of resolving that dispute. Today, no one has that job. They set up a 16-agency council to meet whenever there are disputes. Well, never in the history of mankind has a 16-agency council ever agreed on anything. There's just too many people, and there are too many different interests. Fish and Wildlife has a different interest than the Corps of Engineers, et cetera. It's just never going to happen. Somebody has to be the decision maker and has to be accountable to somebody.
But then how much do we have to put faith and trust in those individuals, how they got those management positions? Let me give you an example, because I think many of us would love to take out a scalpel and try to figure out how we make this all better, not necessarily an axe. And here I'm reading where Mr. Pruitt, who's the head of EPA, who was an avowed hater of many of the things that the EPA did, as Pruitt guts water rules, EPA will allow fracking waste dumping in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, so when we have somebody who comes in and has more authority and is the final arbiter, and we look at some of the things they may want to do, and they're not cleaning out the swamp, they're giving the swamp over to more commercial interests. I mean, do you account for that?
Yeah, okay, so it's a very good question. Ultimately, there are 2 really important checks in our democracy. The first check is that we do have laws, and the laws have goals, and they can be enforced by courts. So the EPA administrator, if he wants to pour pollution into the Gulf of Mexico, almost certainly does not have the authority to do that under existing laws. Mm-hmm. And he can't change those laws. Mm-hmm. So someone can go, just like, someone in the White House couldn't say, I just want to get that built, don't do any environmental review. They couldn't do that. The law doesn't allow them to do that. So first there's law, and that's overseen by an independent branch, the courts. The second thing is, in a democracy, I don't trust anybody, so I don't trust giving complete authority to anybody to do anything. But in a democracy, everyone is surrounded by other people. So there's one official who has the job of deciding whether environmental review is adequate, but there's someone else who's looking over his shoulder as the head of EPA and may have a different point of view. and there might be somebody in the White House who has another different point of view. And so the chances, and then take it down to a lower level, there's an inspector. The inspector is mean-spirited, let's say. I mean, conservatives really hate the idea of giving anybody in government authority, by the way, much more so than
Really?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. You know, when I give a talk in front of a conservative group, I say, no, we want to have 1,000-page rule books so that no government official has any authority. This is the one place the left and the right agree, and it's the reason it's not working, because it's paralyzed by all this stuff. Nobody can make a decision. In almost every setting, a school, an inspection, whatever, there are multiple people who have the ability to stop a bad decision, including courts. And so what you need to trust is not the particular person, but a framework of different people who are looking over each other's shoulders. And by the way, that can still go wrong. I mean, if you look at terrible cultures in history, like Nazi Germany, for example, you know, the whole culture went bad. And so it didn't matter what the law said. It didn't matter what the checks and balances were. And so you have this horrible regime, and that can happen. But I don't think it's going to happen in this country.
Now, you say that with all these changes and giving people more responsibility and having a certain amount of check and balance, the litmus test in all of this is results. What is good? What works? How do we make that judgment? We can all agree or disagree about the results of any action the government or private sector make.
Well, another really good question. Well, my real litmus test is not whether it's good or not, but whether the person with responsibility has the freedom to ask and answer what's the right thing to do here. In other words, I want human agency everywhere in the classroom. I want people to own their choices. It doesn't mean you or I are going to agree, but it means they take responsibility to get something done. And when they fail, and humans fail all the time, then they can be accountable or they can be overturned. But to me, the litmus test is giving people the ability to implement public goals. And then we can hold them accountable. Disagreement is not only to be avoided, not only not to be avoided, is to be encouraged. Democracy works best, and it has a sort of a gravitational force. If you give the principal of a school, let's say, the ability to make decisions about something that people care about, and they'll all come together close, and they won't be polarized, because they have to be reasonable in order to get the principal's attention. Today we have polarized rhetoric because there's no decider. So the politicians just compete by getting more and more extreme. It's all just hot air. So you want a decider, and it brings people together, they disagree, and studies show that when people have a chance to have their say, and the decider disagrees with them and goes the other way, they're nonetheless satisfied with the process because they know they were heard.
And when you look at the work that you've been doing, Common Good, and when you look at all the people who are surrounding you in this effort, Democrats and Republicans, reasonable, rational people like the Bill Bradleys of the world and Lawton Chiles and Alan Simpson, are you getting much traction when you talk about these things with those who are in power today?
Well, you know, I'm on Trump's CEO Council, so I've given presentations down there, and he's adopted, our language about infrastructure. I haven't seen his proposal, so I can't tell you whether he's going to do anything with it. And, as far as I can tell, they've made pretty much every wrong move when it comes to, reform stuff. So I'm not particularly hopeful. Here's what I think. I think the American people are angry, both on the right and on the left. That's why Trump got elected. That's why Bernie Sanders was so popular. They're not quite sure what they're angry about, but part of it has to do with Big Brother, telling them what to do all the time and not having a sense of control over their own communities. And part of it has to do with no obvious, sort of ways to advance yourself in many parts of society and blaming it on immigrants and such. So there's no clear villain. In most movements and change happen when there's a clear villain, like the civil rights movement. Racists were the villain, or the environmental movement. The polluters were the villain, or in the New Deal, the Depression was the villain. The fact people were starving. You had to make changes. So, when I wake up in the morning, what I think about is how do we create a narrative that makes people understand that the villain here is actually all of Washington. It's both parties. It's the whole system. They think it's Big Brother, people in the heartland, but what they don't realize is that Big Brother has had a lobotomy. Big Brother's not deliberately making all these dumb decisions. The system is on autopilot. It's all these literally hundreds of millions of words of law that tell people what to do every day, whether or not they make any sense or not. And the solution isn't to go, amend it here and there. Again, that would take forever. But to actually abandon the system, not abandon the goals, not deregulate. I think you need more regulatory oversight, not less. Because you need to know whether the water's clean and all that kind of stuff. The products are safe. But to simplify it so that people can understand it and so that people have the freedom to try to get there in their own way. And that's what law traditionally was. It was a framework within which people make choices. Today it's become an instruction manual, and it doesn't work any better than central planning because it is central planning.
Well, I love a book that was written by, I believe, a Boston college professor, 3 felonies a day that we are probably all committing because we put so much on the rule books. Nobody's being held to account, so then we kind of flout the law because we don't know the law, and they just overwrite. Well, very, very interesting. Philip K. Howard from Common Good. If anybody wants to get involved with your organization, how should they do that?
Go to simplifygov.org. You'll see our platform. I've got, again, leaders of both parties involved, and there's a vacuum of leadership. It is crying out for a movement, and we need help building the movement, articulating the narrative, and what the simple message is. But I think it has to be a simple message, and I think the simple message is human responsibility. Let people take back responsibility and be accountable. Stop telling us how to do everything, and let's start by creating a structure in Washington where people can't say, the rule made me do it. If they fail, they're out.
All right. Well, listen, you have not failed in your mission today of explaining all this to us, and we thank you for being with us on AmericaTrendsPodcast.com.
Great. Nice being with you.
If you like this episode, please leave us a kind rating or review. I'm on my hands and knees. Please do it on iTunes because your review is really critical for us to continue providing this podcast. And John, I know that iTunes looks at this. They want to make certain that we have some rankings, some visibility, and that we're getting some traffic, and then they give you better positioning.
Absolutely. And this way it'll put us in the forefront so you can find us much easier on your iPhone or Android, whatever you may be using.
And they may even send you out an alert. So please, if you can, don't miss a single episode of America Trends Podcast. And, John, they can subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher.com.
And also subscribe on our website.
Oh, absolutely.
We send out a little blurb, and we can also take your emails there at newsletter@rifkinradio.com. That's another way to get us.
And we do not sell or share our lists.
No spamming, nothing.
Well, I don't know. Does anybody want our lists? I don't know, but we don't do it.
Good question.
Even if they asked us.
Nobody's
asked us. But.
Right.
And when you do subscribe, let us know on Facebook and Twitter. We're getting very active on Facebook and Twitter. Our handle on both platforms, and John, this is really easy, @Trends Podcast. That's it.
That's real easy.
You like that? Did you get that?
I got that.
Okay.
I'm going to have to check it out now. I'm going to have to twit it.
We want to thank you, of course, personally for subscribing. And we also would like to get some of your ideas and questions for future episodes of America Trends Podcast. And that's important, too, because we're all over the map. our interest editorially in the future, John, has no bounds. But we want to know what it is that you'd like to hear from us. If there was a segment that you'd like to see us follow up on, or if there's something in depth that you'd like us to deal with, please let us know that too.
We're looking at the future. There's so much we can look at.
Yeah, and the topics that we've dealt with, I mean, we have gotten such incredible guests over the recent period, but they're only going to come to us if they know we've got an engaged and interactive audience.
Absolutely.
So it's really important that you become part of this podcast in so many different ways that we're sharing with you today.
You're absolutely right. We need your support and your help and your reviews.
And your ideas.
And ideas.
Or questions on Facebook and Twitter. And by the way, you can direct message us at Trends Podcast or using the hashtag Trends Podcast. You can also add an email address if you have a public one that you'd like us to give out.
Yeah, good. And you know what? We didn't mention Amazon.
Oh, yes. We have an Amazon store.
Yes.
And so if you go up, you don't have to buy the things that might be highlighted at that particular time. You can buy any book, and there's some benefit that comes back
Just
to
put
us.
what you're looking at in the little search engine block there, and it'll take you right to Amazon, and it'll help us out.
Absolutely. And it doesn't really cost you anything more because they have built that into their pricing structure. So we get a little taste and you get more programming like this and you get the item that you were looking for. So it works for all of us.
It's a win-win.
Absolutely. Win-win-win.
Win-win-win.
So for more information on America Trends and for the latest updates on upcoming episodes, be sure to like our page on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. You can find us at Trends Podcast. And again, you can find John and I here in our studio performing as best we can for you.
That's right.
And
Let us out.
What's that? They're not going to let us out. No one is. Hey, listen, thank you so much for joining us today on America Trends. We'll see you next time.
We hope to hear from you soon.
Oh, by the way, we are posting all the time. And we're posting on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Good point.
So just be aware, if you're looking for new episodes, they're coming on Tuesdays and Thursdays. When you wake up, before you go out on your jog or your walk and you want to take us with you, we'll be there for you.
Very good.
All right. Have a great day.